Welcome to Science with Soul. I'm Dr. Lottie Valentine and the host of this program. I'm a physician, evidential psychic medium, international keynote speaker, and the author of Med School After Menopause, The Journey of My Soul. This podcast was inspired by events from my own life, and as I have journeyed through life, it has taught me that we're part of a greater divine web of interconnectedness. I have walked the path of illness, healing, and transformation, and after experiencing 2 near-death experiences, I became clairvoyant, clairaudient, and clairsentient, and I was guided to attend medical school at the age of 54. In this podcast, we will meet many different types of doctors, healers, spiritual leaders, educators, and other interesting souls. And it is my hope that you will gain information from this podcast to help create a path of healing your own life physically, emotionally, and spiritually, and bridge the gap between science and soul. Welcome to Science with Soul. I'm Dr. Lottie and the host of this podcast. Today, I am so excited to have Michael Mayo as a guest. Michael Mayo is an internationally trained medium, astrologer, and spiritual teacher. He developed his mediumship in the United Kingdom under mediums such as Gordon Smith at the School of Intuitive Studies and Eileen Davies at Arthur Findlay College. Michael brings a practical, grounded, and evidential style to his spiritual work. While developing his mediumship, Michael graduated from the University of California, Irvine, with a BA in psychology and social behavior and a BA in drama. With his passion for teaching and helping others discover their own unique spiritual connection, he has taught and studied in the US, Europe, and Australia. Michael is also a second-generation astrologer with over 18 years of understanding astrological theory. He teaches and holds workshops throughout the United States and abroad, helping others explore and personally develop through the understanding of astrology. Blending his many spiritual gifts and skills with his practical, grounded, results-oriented approach, Michael helps you discover your strengths, what holds you back, and empowers you to discover your own inner strength and grit. He provides a safe, positive, and supportive environment for each person that comes to his workshops, development circles, or consultations. Throughout his many years of working with the spirit world, he has brought messages of love and hope from those on the higher side of life. His greatest mission is to show that life, like love, is eternal. So welcome, Michael. I'm so excited to have you as a guest today.
Thank you, Dr. Lottie. I'm excited to be here.
So tell me, what is, for those who are not familiar with mediumship, can you just describe what is a medium?
Yeah, so a medium is someone who has the ability to bridge the two worlds and be able to connect with the other side of life. So what I mean by bridge the two worlds is essentially they've learned or they've developed their ability to kind of quiet their mind so that they can become receptive and allow the spirit world to impress them with information, to bring us evidence and therefore bring a message to those on this side of life. So it's basically being able to sense and perceive the more subtle information that comes from the other world.
So how do you do that? So how do you communicate with the spirit world? I know there's different ways that you could hear them or maybe see them or feel it. So how does that happen for you?
Yeah, basically when to learn to connect with the other world, one of the first things that we have to do is to learn to kind of quiet and still our mind, get our mind under control, because as we all know, in this day and age, our mind is constantly needing some new stimulus to be, happening constantly. And what we haven't really been taught is how to actually become receptive, to become quiet. And so when we learn to become receptive and quiet, we start to attune to our energetic senses. So those can be what we call clairvoyance, which is seeing, clairaudience, which is hearing, clairsentience, which is feeling, and then claircognizance, which is a sense of knowing. And basically, this is how we end up getting information from the other world by taking our focus away from our normal physical senses and putting them onto these more sensitive, energetic senses. That's how the spirit world is able to impress us, and we receive information. For me personally, I would say clairsentience is probably one of my biggest strengths. So being able to feel. So what does that mean? What does that feel like? It's essentially feeling sensations, emotions, changes in the energy in the atmosphere. And then I also hear oftentimes. So clairaudience is that. And that's always nice when that pops in because then you just repeat what you hear. But yeah, I would say it's a mix of all of them, but I would say heavily clairsentience, clairaudience.
So, what happens if somebody schedules a session with you and they would like to have contact with somebody that has passed to the other side? How does that information come to you? What kind of information can you tell them?
Yeah, sure. So essentially, whenever you have a consultation, something that anyone who's going to get a reading should know is that it's not something that we can just sort of call up and just be like, "Hey, I want this loved one to come forward." While I know that it is possible, it's not really the way that it's done necessarily. And when someone comes to me, essentially, I'm going to allow myself to become passive, quiet, and receptive, and then just as I become sensitive, I'm feeling into the atmosphere around me. What will then happen is there'll be a shift or a change in that atmosphere, and that will indicate to me that there's a presence there. As I feel that presence might start to impress me with different things. So that can be oftentimes personality is one of the first things that comes through. So who they were, what they were like. Whenever you meet someone, you get a sense of who they are, like right off the bat. As soon as you meet them, you get this sort of sense of like, oh, I have this first impression, essentially. And that's really what we're doing whenever we're sensing the presence of a spirit person, except this person just isn't physically in the room. They're energetically in the room, but they're not like there. And so as soon as you start to feel that, that's what you start to describe. And so I'll start to describe that. And as I relax and deepen that blending with this spirit presence, as I kind of, in a sense, get to know them a little bit better, my awareness starts to even more expand. And then I might get more details. So then I might start becoming aware of specific details about their life, maybe names, important dates, even street addresses, all kinds of different things that can just sort of come into my awareness. um, so we start to move into more specificity as I kind of deepen that connection with the presence. So ideally, I'm giving you stuff that you'll be able to recognize that this is your loved one. Does that make sense?
Uh-huh. So, you talked about the personality. So, can you tell if it was a happy kind of person who liked to joke a lot, or if he was kind of a stern personality and angry and maybe abusive personality? Can you tell that the difference between that? Does
Absolutely.
that come through?
Absolutely. Just like how we can sense it with people here. When you meet someone, when you know someone, you get a sense of who they are. And so as you start to talk about it, the spirit presence essentially wants to be recognized. And so they're going to impress us the way that they remember themselves, the way that they were, so that we can describe it to the sitter so that they have a better understanding of who this person is, right? So, because the spirit person is there for the sitter, they're there for the person receiving the information, and it's that love or maybe that need for an apology or whatever that needs to come through. So when I'm working with someone, what I also find is that it's not simplistic. Most people aren't just one thing. So as you start to describe who they are, what they are, you end up finding these multifaceted qualities to someone. So yes, you can definitely feel if they were a generally grumpy, cranky person, but also since it's not limited by kind of just how they were when you knew them, you can also find out how were they when they were young, or what changed and what important things happened in their lives that sort of shaped them and turned them into the way that they are too. And I think that plays a huge role in when someone is coming forward to really get those details of who they are.
So, if somebody asked you, is life eternal? I know that you in your bio you said that life, like love, is eternal. So do you feel that by contacting the spirit world and being able to bring this information through to the person, that life is eternal?
Yeah, so what I can do is provide evidence to support my claim, essentially. And when we think about it, I know that, especially scientifically minded people, they're like, well, how is this possible that you can bring forward this information? It must be fraud. It must be something else, right? You must have researched the person before. But I think that that comes to kind of lack of understanding of consciousness in general, and that we are much more than just this physical body. That our awareness doesn't exist in just this one form, and so what I can do is provide through the connection. Hey, look, here's all this stuff that I feel and can tell that there is a presence here giving me this information. Let me tell you what they're giving me, and therefore hopefully that shows you, yes, they are still here, they are still around me. It's the evidence that comes forward in a message that I think creates the reality, right? This idea that we are continuous. And what I have found, being a pretty skeptical person myself, I've always challenged kind of what people bring forward as like evidence for spiritual, activities and that sort of thing. um, but I think when you look at the whole picture of like sort of afterlife topic in general, so we also include things like near death experiences, which I know you've had yourself.
Mhm.
Um, and we also include evidential mediumship. When you start to really put all the pieces together, there really is something very real that is happening. So for me, based on my experiences and what I have given countless times, I feel very confident in saying that life is eternal.
And what do you say to people that ask you, life is eternal, because they have a religious belief that if you're religious, life is eternal. But if you were an atheist or committed suicide, or you were abusive towards people here on earth when you were alive, that your life is not eternal, you end up in hell, or something bad is going to happen. Um, what have you learned from communicating with the spirit world with these people that they came through that they were an atheist or they committed suicide, and etc.? What have you learned from that?
Sure, yeah. Well, one of the biggest things that I've learned is that regardless of what your belief system is, you still end up on the other side and you're still able to communicate with this side of life. So, whether you thought this was real, I mean, I can't tell you how many times in my readings that a communicator literally says to me, I didn't believe in any of this when I was alive. And it's surprising for me to be in this experience myself. But
Right.
also just kind of to support those who maybe have lost someone through suicide or through something like that. I have never found that they were ever stuck, punished, any kind of negative repercussion from that experience. So my hope is that that eases some people's mind that maybe something bad happened to my loved one now that they went that way. But the reality is nobody's getting out of this life alive. No one is gonna escape death. So how we get
Right.
there, just how we get there.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? And so
Yes.
I want to reassure people that there isn't. I've never had anyone reporting to me from hell saying, "Oh, it's fire and brimstone here." What I actually found is the more that I communicate with the other world, the more that I find that the foundation of it all is love. And when you get to feel that unconditional love, when you get to be of service to the spirit world, to the person that's there getting the reading, and you get to bring forward maybe words that were not, that were left unsaid, or maybe being able to give that final goodbye, or maybe be able to give that love that they're sending to their person, or understanding, forgiveness, whatever that is, um, to me that is where the real value comes from. So
Mhm,
whether
mhm.
someone is going to believe in one thing over another, the reality is ultimately we are all of love and we all return to love, and that's just been my experience through working with the spirit world.
Mhm. You mentioned that sometimes the spirit themselves are surprised to see that they can communicate. And that is actually something that happened to me too, because my father was an MD. He was a family practitioner, a physician.
Uh-huh.
And when I had my near death experience, which is, not 28 years ago, and I told him about it, and he looked at me and he said, that can't happen. That you can't leave your body and then go back in. That it's like it can't happen. That's just in your mind, or lack of oxygen or whatever. And then in 2017, after I graduated from med school, I went to Arthur Findlay College, and had readings with the teachers there, and really I started to understand that life is really eternal.
Yeah.
And my father popped in, and he said, with a wink in his eye, "You proved me wrong." So
I love
I
that.
yeah, so it's very funny because I think it's like you said, it's surprising to them too. And
Mhm.
I've gotten that, studying at Arthur Findlay too, from other relatives, that they're really excited to see that, oh my gosh, I can communicate with you guys and you're still there, right? And it's
Absolutely.
surprising to them because I was an atheist myself before I had my near death experience, did
Right.
not believe in anything. So if I had actually died and stayed on the other side, I would have been one of those very surprised spirits on the
Ab-
other side saying, wow, this is amazing. We can actually communicate with you living people. So
Absolutely. And I think that what's interesting about what you're saying with that is, that is a very common theme with people who have near death experiences. There are so many people who didn't believe in this, who had maybe some sort of religious belief or something that things worked a certain way. But all of these people that are having these experiences can't be wrong, right? There's something to,
right.
and I think that's something important to consider when we're
Mhm.
looking at, the evidence for the afterlife.
Yeah, absolutely. There is evidence of the afterlife. And it makes sense, right? Because all the people that have near death experiences, and there are thousands of people, and the
Oh, yeah,
more our medical technology advances, the more people are going to start having these experiences.
100%.
And it's when you've had that experience too, it helps you understand that life is eternal. This is just the body, that we're the house for the spirit while we're here having this earthly experience.
Absolutely.
So tell me, what path, how did you end up studying mediumship? How did that come to happen for you?
Yeah, so I've always had a sort of spiritual, religious sort of bent to me. I mean, I remember being literally a little kid wanting to know what God is. And I don't know if it's because when I was born, I was premature and was basically given my last rites. I was gonna die, essentially. I don't know if maybe that's part of the reason why. I don't know, but I've always had this sort of desire to understand what's this bigger picture. And I tried many different paths to sort of discover that. But what ended up happening is I stumbled into a new agey bookstore because I was in massage school, and I had one of our teachers had like crystals and cards, and I was like, that's cool. I want to go to a place where I can get that. When I stumbled into this new age place, I spoke to the owner, and he's like, oh, there's a demonstration going on tonight, why don't you go check it out? I was like, what's a demonstration? And he's like, oh, it's a medium. So they talked to departed loved ones. I was like, oh, okay. I'd seen maybe like Sylvia Brown on Montel or something like that, John Edwards or something. And so I was like, okay, I'll go. So I sat and I was like, well, they're never going to come to me because I don't have any people who have died. And so the medium, who was a UK medium called Peter Close, he came to me and he said, there's this older gentleman that is here that's wanting me to let you know that you're a medium. You need to start developing, and one day you'll be doing what I'm doing. And I was like, what? Like, just totally blown away and confused, and was just like, I don't know. And so, because he said, are you aware you're very psychic? And I answered yes, only because I'd had dreams that had come true and that sort of thing, but I didn't understand what he meant. And so once he told me that, I was like, whoa. So he said, okay, you need to go to a development circle and start developing. So when I went to the first development circle, it was like your perfect reading. It had names, dates, relationship, da, 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 da. I mean, it was all there. And I think it was all there because I had no understanding or expectation of what I was doing. And so that experience made me go, oh, I guess that guy was right. But then every time after, I tried to do a reading. I always was blocked. I couldn't get anything. And so that began my journey of development, which, now in hindsight, I can look back and say, oh, well, this is why, this is why, this is why you
Mhm.
weren't getting anything. But to me, I think that was in some ways the way the spirit dangled the carrot for me, to basically be like, look, here's what's possible. Now go develop it, go work on it.
Mhm.
So that's kind of how I got my start in all of this. I was
Right. And
18.
at
Yeah.
18, I was going to say, how old were you at the time?
Yeah, I was 18. So,
18. And then how old were you when you started studying in England?
um, oh, how old was I? I want to say it was like maybe 7 or 8 years into my development. That's when I actually went over to England, and that's when I think I spent like 4 years or something, kind of just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So I don't know the exact age, but I remember, yeah, I just know that I was going there all the time working with Gordon because I was taking his intuitive studies, and then I was, funnily enough, working with Gordon. I ended up working at that shop that I told you I was kind of discovered my mediumship at. And another Scottish medium came in who was like, hey, you should go work with Eileen Davies. And that's how I got connected with her.
Right.
And then, yeah, so now then them two became my basically my mentors that I have now. So, in fact, just before this, I was on the phone with Gordon and we were just
Oh,
chatting.
wow.
Yeah, yeah.
That's great. And so why did you go to England to study versus studying in the United States? Or
Yeah, so part of the reason that happened was because I was trying to go see Gordon, because what happened with me was I had developed my medium, started developing my mediumship here, and then I had started to have some really great experiences in circles that I was having, but um, there was a point where I had this moment. There's a certain feeling that I get right before great spiritual growth. And it's just this interesting, weird thing. I'd never heard anyone else having something like this, but maybe other people do. Um, I get this pressure at the back of my neck and I get this pulling right in my solar plexus. And when I have that experience, I know that that's this, I've learned over time, it's maybe only happened 3 times. I know that the spirit world's saying, hey, pay attention. We're trying to tell you something. And so in that moment, when I felt that experience, I was like, okay, spirit, I'm just going to lay down and have you just give me whatever's coming. And they just said clairaudiently to me, Gordon Smith. And I was like, oh, okay. And I felt the urge to look him up, so then I looked him up. And when I found his website, he was doing an event on my birthday. And I was like, oh my gosh, that seems like a sign to me. Like I need to go see this guy because I knew that he was an amazing medium and I needed to go see him. So I said, okay, spirit, if I'm meant to go to this, then just open the doors. And then the next, maybe a few days later, I get this impression, strong power impression to look up flights. And I found flights to the UK for like, I'm not even kidding you, round trip was like maybe like $400. I think it was like 395. And I was like, oh my gosh, I could do that. So anyway, that's what kind of sprung me to start going to, the UK for development. It started with Gordon and then continued with Eileen as well. And
wow, what a
and
story.
yeah, the reason that I go to the UK is because their standard of mediumship tends to be higher, and I think it's partly because of spiritualism sort of existing there, so and kind of flourishing. So I think the standard's just a little bit higher, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Right, compared to the United States,
Yeah,
it's much more common,
yeah,
right, in England
absolutely.
than it is here. Um, so can anybody develop into a medium or start talking to the spirit world?
Yeah, I love that question. Because I think for a long time people treated mediumship as like this very special, unique gift that like, oh, you have to be born with it or it has to run in your family or something like that. And that's just not been my experience. As someone who's been teaching for many years, with all my students, I think there's maybe less than a handful of students where maybe I was like, maybe this isn't the one you're gonna, maybe this isn't for you. But I think that the majority, vast, vast, vast majority of people can develop mediumship. I like what Gladys Osborne Leonard said, which is essentially when she was asked the same question. Gladys Osborne Leonard was the famous medium of the past. When she was asked, can anyone be a medium? She basically said that mediumship exists at varying levels within each person. And it's just a matter of how deep you have to go to unfold those gifts. And so I personally believe and agree with that wholeheartedly, that it's just a matter of how much we have to do to get our own thinking mind out of the way. The more that we can get our thinking mind out of the way, the better we'll be able to connect to our spiritual experiences, because I very much believe that the thinking mind is the antithesis to your spiritual awareness, right? Your thinking mind is for this world. Your spiritual awareness is something much bigger. So yes, I believe anyone can do it. And I think that the only way you'll know is if you try, because I didn't know I could do it. And
Right.
this is one of the biggest things that like I want to highlight for people is like, just because you've never had like crazy stories of spiritual experiences as a child, because you hear that a lot. A lot of mediums are like, yeah, there was floating heads and I talked to my grandma and I knew who she was, but I'd never met her. You know what I mean? Like these
Right.
crazy stories, and I never had any of those. And yet this was something that was very much for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's a big point I always want to make to people. You don't have to be some specially ordained human to have that. You already are a spiritual being. You already are that, whether you realize it or not. So it's only natural that you should then be able to access the abilities that come from being exactly what you are.
Oh, well said. Absolutely. We are spiritual creatures. And I think sometimes we forget that we are, and that we really are connected to all that is. We are part of the universe, right? We're part of Earth and the universe and everything. We're all connected through that. Um, so, thinking of the planets and the universe, I know that you also work with astrology,
Yes.
and you've been doing this for a long time. Um, what brought you to this work? What is your background in astrology?
Yeah, it's interesting. Astrology was kind of always around in my household because my mom was very much into astrology and very fascinated by it. So I was always around. But as I think I was in like sixth grade when I really started to become very interested in it and wanted to understand it, because I wanted to understand people better. And so that kind of got me into astrology, particularly modern astrology. And then later on in my journey, I discovered more traditional methods of astrology, which I have found to be incredibly accurate. And that's kind of what I specialize in, is traditional astrology versus the modern thing. The basic difference between those two things is modern astrology is very much focuses on character, so character of the individual, and that leads to outcomes like your future essentially, whereas traditional astrology tends to focus on circumstances. So here's what's going to be happening, kind of whether you want it to or not. And so that is much more effective at prediction than maybe kind of just saying, oh, you're a Gemini, so therefore you talk a lot. Do you know what I mean? So
Mhm.
yeah, so that's how I got into it. I've always kind of had it in the background no matter what else I was doing in my life. And it's so much fun. I really enjoy doing it.
So, for people who are new to astrology, what can you learn from like getting your astrological chart? What can you learn about yourself?
Yeah, so there's multiple charts. So it's not just one chart fits all. So what we're most used to is natal charts, which is basically about the individual and their life essentially, and what will unfold in that life. But natal charts in the modern context tends to be more psychological. So learning about the self. So what are your motivations? What do you want to do? Who you are, how you behave with romance, how you behave in with children. All your interests, everything, just kind of, you can see it playing out. And essentially your birth chart ends up being the theme of your life. Essentially, it's like your little fingerprint, and you're going to see these energies playing out whatever you're doing. So having a good understanding of that is going to be helpful in sort of navigating how you go forward in life. So yeah, you can basically see pretty much everything in a birth chart.
Right. So, can you see, major things that are going to happen? Let's say I get my chart for next year,
Yeah.
and can I see major things that are going to play out in my chart?
Absolutely. And what we would say is definitely what if you got like one for the fall next year, a technique that we often use, or I use specifically, is solar return, which is basically birthday to birthday. And so it tells you what's going to be coming up for you in the year. And what's really fun about that, I have clients who've been coming to me for years for these because of their accuracy. I'm able to give them, here are the themes of what you can expect this year. Here are the things that are probably going to happen. I've been able to predict all kinds of events and things like that through the year just based off of that solar return, because it's looking over that whole entire the whole entire year of what's coming. Personally, my favorite chart to do is actually called an orary chart. And the orary chart is based on the moment that the client asks a question. So the person asks a question, and then I cast a chart based on that moment, and I'm able to answer questions like, where are my lost keys, where
Right.
when will I get this job, and if so, when. These kinds of questions that are just very yes or no and or timing questions. You can pretty much answer anything with this very simple technique. You don't need to know what time you were born. You don't need to know anything. It's a traditional technique. This is what astrologers of the past used to do. We didn't have
Hmm.
um, you know anyone writing down birth times back in middle age. So essentially you just had to, the person came to the astrologer with the question. What the astrologer would do is actually then um, describe either a mole or a scar or something on the person's body, to validate, yeah, like, look, I know what I'm talking about, and then they would answer their question for them. And that's, for me, my favorite form of charts to do because they're so accurate.
And
So
what was that called? What's
orrery,
that?
or
Orrery.
yeah, Horary, orrery. So based on,
Orrery.
basically, on the hour, you can imagine it that way, orrery.
Right. And if people are interested in getting their chart or working with you, they can just go to your website.
Yeah, they can go to mediummichaelmayo.com. And that is also on Instagram, Medium Michael Mayo, YouTube, Medium Michael Mayo, Facebook, Medium Michael Mayo. I try to keep it pretty simple. So yeah, Medium Michael Mayo.
Right. And do you also teach astrology, or do you just teach about mediumship?
So right now, I do teach astrology, but since COVID, I haven't done anything online right now. But with regards to mediumship and psychic awareness and trance, all that I teach online. And then I'm actually currently working on an online program, self-paced online program for astrology. So as soon as that comes out, I'll be posting that to my website and all of that. So yeah.
And if people are curious about if they can develop, a skill in mediumship, let's say they have a sense that, their grandmother is in the room, but they're not quite sure if they're just imagining it. Um, are these people a good candidate for taking one of your classes and learning how to develop that?
I would say anyone who has an interest in wanting to understand themselves, their spiritual awareness, even whether or not they've had experiences, are a good candidate to take the class. If it's something that you're interested in, if it's something that you want to explore, because the reality is there's, you know, like I said for myself, I didn't even know that I had any ability really. I mean, now looking in hindsight, I can highlight some of it, but at the time I had no clue. And so, I always encourage people that whether or not right now, if you're interested, just try. Just try and see if it works. And, my classes, my weekly classes, I have weekly classes on Sundays, and they're only $25. So, you know, pop into the
Oh, so
class, see if it works for you, and go from there. So
So you don't have to sign up for, months long classes. You can just pop in and take one class and see how it goes.
yeah, my online classes, I set it up that way on purpose. So I have my weekly classes, and those are intentionally, very affordable for people to explore. And also because development takes time, I want to make it very accessible to people. I also offer one-to-one mentoring, two-to-one mentoring, so you and another student, and then small group mentoring, which is three to four people. And that's majority of what I do. is largely, my mentoring. So that way, let's say you're shy and you don't really want to be in a big old group of people, you can always do, mentoring and that sort of thing. So that way you don't have to, I don't know, some people get really shy in groups and that sort of thing. So mentoring is a good alternative too.
Yeah. So what advice do you have to people who um, they would love to try it, but they're kind of scared, to go into that group, or to come on a Sunday and try it, because what if I can't do anything,
Yeah.
or I can't bring any, messages in, or I can't connect? What advice do you have to these people to help them come to your class and try it?
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, there's never an expectation that you have to be able to bring forward a message. There's never an expectation that you have to do anything really. All I ask is that you show up and you try the things that I suggest. That being said, what I always do is scale the class and the exercise to the individual's awareness. And there are very specific things that we sort of develop with each person. So I'm definitely never throwing any brand new person and saying, "Who's here? Tell me all this stuff." Instead, what I probably would start with is just sensing and feeling, learning to feel your energy, learning to develop what we call awareness. And so just being aware that, there's no expectation, and wherever you are, we're going to work with that awareness, and then start to unfold that as we move along. So there's never any pressure, and it's just about exploring, and it's just about exploring the potential of what's there for you.
I love it. So everybody go to his website and check him out. And so again, your website is Medium Michael Mayo,
mediummichaelmayo.com.
right? And there you can sign up for a session or get a reading or learn more about astrology. So go check that out. Do you also have a newsletter, or
Yeah, so
just
there's on
stay
my website you can subscribe to a newsletter that's on there.
so they can get updates on what you're doing, and new events and classes coming? Um, Again, thank you so much for joining us today, Michael. It's been my pleasure. And everybody go check out his website. He's amazing. And I'd love to have you back in the future and talk more in depth about mediumship and how that can help people.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lottie. It was a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Dr. Lottie, Science with Soul. Make sure you are subscribed so you will be notified of new episodes as they become available. To book a session with me, or to sign up for a workshop, or to see me as a physician, please visit drlottie.com or divinespiritualessence.com. My book, Med School After Menopause, The Journey of My Soul, is available online at Amazon as well as other online platforms worldwide.